The American trucking industry may be the most evil industry in the USA. It is an industry full of scams designed to steal money from drivers, and steal money it does, to the tune of millions of dollars every year. Let me tell you about the top 5 biggest scams in the trucking industry, in my opinion. This video is sponsored by Lanefinder. Lanefinder is the ultimate driver job platform for drivers to search out companies to work for. It's got all sorts of filters, but the best one is, in my opinion, that they can sort through carriers to find out exactly what they're looking for and do research on the carriers without having to call a recruiter first. It'll give them all the information they need. I'm pumped about this platform. Check them out at lanefinder.com. Number 5, load brokers. Now, load brokers are nothing more than middlemen that stand between the shipper and the trucking company or the truck driver. And these guys have really been able to dig in and establish themselves in the trucking industry in the last 20 years. And it's unbelievable because they're non-essential. They've just been able to worm their way in there somehow, and they take huge chunks of profit for themselves. They take as much money off the rate, the freight rate, as they think they can get away with. And they steal millions of dollars from truck drivers every year. A load broker's goal, his number one goal, is to take as much money as he possibly can get away with out of the rate so the load moves as cheaply as possible. He pockets as much as he possibly can. The truck moves for as little as it possibly can, and sometimes at a loss. These guys are non-governed. There are no laws governing the transparency of them right now. We've been pushing for them for years, but right now they just have a license to steal money, and steal money they do. The number 4 biggest scam, unpaid resets away from home. Now, truck driving used to pay so well that when you finally burned out at the end of the day, when you got to wherever you had to go and you had to sit for a couple of days to wait for your backhaul, it was no big deal because you'd run all the miles you needed to run to be profitable and make a good living. But these days, these unpaid resets are a thing of the past, and there's no excuse for them. Yet the trucking companies use this hours of service excuse to not have to pay truck drivers for their resets. Their excuse is, well, the resets are mandated by the hours of service, which is the government, so they're making us do that, so we don't have to pay the driver for that time. And that's utter and complete nonsense. Just because the hours of service say that you've got to stop and take a break, when you're resetting away from home, you're with the truck. And when you're with the truck away from home, you're at work. So that time should be paid. Yet it's a scam that trucking companies just love to capitalize on. And some of the trucking companies will even stipulate that you've got to do your reset with the truck, not leave the truck unguarded. You've got to stay with the truck for the reset, but they're still not going to pay you for it. That's utter nonsense, and it's a huge scam. The 3rd biggest scam in this day and age, and I can hardly believe it still goes on, lumpers. Now, lumpers are basically associated with large grocery chain warehouses or large box store companies with huge warehousing systems like Walmart or somebody like that. But the concept of having to pay the customer to unload his own freight just boggles the mind. And I don't know how under law in this day and age they get away with that type of thing. But it should be illegal, and it's not. It's just something that the government just kind of looks the other way and lets them keep going because these big corporations have a lot of power and a lot of pull with the government. They donate a lot of financial contributions to their favorite party, and they get away with this crap. But the idea that you should have to pay to have their freight unloaded onto their dock and have it cost you money is insane. I can't think of a bigger scam, hardly, than lumping. It's definitely in the top 5. The 2nd biggest scam, unpaid waiting time for drivers at customers that are waiting to load or unload. Now, this never used to be a problem, but as the carriers got bigger and the warehouses got bigger and the contracts got bigger, the waiting time became a problem because the warehouses weren't organized enough and they were too busy. So the carriers complained And the carriers all get paid now for that waiting time. It didn't used to happen because after a little while the drivers just wouldn't put up with it. And they just call their dispatcher or just leave, one of the two. But now the carriers get paid for the waiting time that you're sitting there waiting to load or unload. Don't mistake that. It's just that they do not want to pass that on to the drivers. And by not paying that waiting time, giving them like the first 2 hours or something free, which is absolute nonsense, the carriers just pocket that money, keep their mouths shut, and the drivers don't make any money on those deals. And you can take a truck driver that works 70 hours a week, but if he's doing medium or short haul work, it is not unusual for a truck driver to rack up 20 hours a week in unpaid time waiting at shippers and receivers. Now think about that. 20 hours a week. The average worker works 40 hours a week. And here's the average truck driver giving half of that time away for free, and the rest of the society just doesn't have to put up with that. They don't even think about doing that. Giving the boss half their work week for free, and yet it's commonplace in trucking, and that's a scam. The number one scam in modern trucking today, and my absolute favorite scam because it is the worst, are leasing or fleecing programs to the truck drivers. Now, years ago, the carriers got together and got thinking, how can we make more money? And they came up with this idea that the way to make more money was not to spend any money. So rather than spending it on the trucks and the fuel and paying the drivers, the carriers thought, why don't we just pass all those costs onto the driver? And all of a sudden, carriers didn't have to pay for the trucks. They didn't have to pay for the fuel. They didn't have to pay for the maintenance. And they didn't have to pay the drivers because all those costs were passed on to some poor sap that leased a truck because the carrier sold them on the idea that, hey, you could own your own business someday. You could be in business for yourself. You could live the American dream, life of freedom on the highways, and it was just a huge scam. And all sorts of these guys, millions of them, went broke because these leases were just so ridiculous, and the interest rates the carriers charged on leasing the trucks were loan sharking basically, and the carrier could charge whatever he wanted for the fuel, whatever he wanted for the maintenance, and it broke millions of guys. And that's part of why there's what they call a driver shortage today. There are all sorts of licensed CDL drivers in the USA that could drive, but they've been raped so badly by the trucking industry and this leasing program that they got out of the industry altogether, and they just refuse to drive anymore because it is such a scam. So those are the top 5 biggest scams that we came up with, and the sad part is that when we sat down to figure out the biggest scams, we had a list of so many scams in the trucking industry, it was embarrassing, and that's why we came up with a dishonorable mentions list for other scams that we hadn't talked about. And those include sign-on bonuses that don't pay when you sign on, or fuel bonuses that you can only get if you drive the truck 30 miles an hour, or there are the percentage pay skim off the top scams, or the dispatch do me a favor scams, which basically means you're working for nothing. The scams are just beyond belief in the trucking industry. It's a big problem for the trucking industry, and we've done this video because drivers need to be aware of how dirty this industry can be so they can watch for these scams and protect their wallets. Happily, the trucking industry is not completely inundated with scam carriers. There are some good carriers out there to work for. Those are the carriers that we look for and try to highlight. So don't get discouraged. Take the time, seek out the good, honest carriers, because they are out there. And if you do that and you find the right carrier, trucking can be a great career. Let me tell you a scam that I got caught in from my past. Now, years ago, I ran my own truck and trailer, and I hauled produce out of California. But when CARB came into being in California, I knew I could no longer go there without buying a new truck and a new reefer engine. I wasn't yet ready to retire, so I had to find something else to do. So I found a carrier, a chemical tanker outfit that had a good reputation at the time, and I signed on with them. And they were a good deal for a little while. And then they changed owners, and then the terminal manager, of course, changed. And they announced that, and they had always paid by PC Miler, which was good with me. So they announced that they were going to go to the latest version of PC Miler after the new management took over. And I thought, well, that's no problem for me because I have PC Miler. That's how I used to use that mileage to quote rates for the customers that I had. So I had the program so I could check what they were doing. So sure enough, every trip I did after the new management took over, I was short of miles. And it was 50, 100, 150, and I kept track of it all. And after the end of the month, I went in and said, something's wrong with your PC Miler. I want to see printouts of the trips that I have done on your PC Miler program. Well, they wouldn't do it. I said, well, here's what you paid me, and here's a printout of the PC Miler trip. And it showed how many miles I was short. And they just hummed and hawed, and they just didn't understand it. They just understand it. They understood it exactly. They were trimming the PC Miler, running it shortest possible route or running it from the wrong points, trying to scam the drivers. I ended up leaving there. I had planned to stay a few years until I was retirement age, but that scam was enough to make me leave the trucking industry altogether. And I still did local trucking after that by the hour, but it was a big scam that I never forgot, and it got me out of the long haul industry. Take care. Don't get scammed by these carriers. Keep an eye on your paychecks. It's your money. Keep the rubber side down. We'll see you on the backhaul.